Okay, so this is the last video for Chapter 4, and in this video we're going to be looking at economic activity and the link between economic activity and economic growth and living standards and economic prosperity for society and how they interrelate and some of the positive and negative relationships. It's page 78 and 82 of your textbook for those following along at home. Whenever you use the term living standards, and this is critically important, and I did mention it within microeconomics, you want to be making links to both material and non-material living standards. So living standards is the overall state of well-being experienced by citizens in a given nation. And average material living standards relates to people's purchasing power or their access to goods and services. So essentially we're talking about material wealth. And in the main way we measure that is GDP per capita. Non-material living standards is referring to other quality of life factors, which are more difficult to measure. Things like stress and happiness and if we have a more polluted environment would go into that, and the level of crime, and the level of congestion on the roads. All of those kind of things are affecting our non-material living standards. Our level of choice whenever we're looking at market structures. And if we don't have as much choice in what to buy, we're not as happy. Our favourite thing is not on the shelves. So whenever you mention living standards, you want to be referring to these two things. Okay, so material living standards are affected by the amount or real value of goods and services, because that'll affect national income, which will flow onto GDP per capita. It rises when the economy gets bigger, so we have economic growth, we have more access to resources. Depends on whether the nation's goods and services produced each year are shared fairly, so some people will have high material living standards, others won't. Depends on inflation, because if there's inflation, people will have less purchasing power, so we may experience high growth in nominal terms, but not real terms. And also affected by the level of unemployment. If there's a high level of unemployment, then people will generally have low material living standards because they don't earn as much factor income. And then non-material living standards, quality of life factors. Okay, so not material goods and services, but things like personal happiness, environmental health, overall health, amount of leisure time that we have, whether we like our jobs. So we might be really rich, but we have a job that's really boring, and therefore we have low material living standards, e.g. accountants. Level of crime, so we might be rich but scared we're going to get stabbed. If you have strong relationships with friends and family. Level of freedom is really important as well, so the freedom to have, to vote, to not be persecuted, to have all our democratic values adhered to. And overcrowding is another thing. So you may be really rich but can't get access to land to have a kick of the footy, or anything else that you want to do that's going to boost your non-material living standards. Link between economic growth and living standards. Well, basically the purpose of economic activity is to boost our living standards. Economic growth leads to an increased volume of production, which leads to higher incomes, higher real incomes, and therefore people have more access to goods and services. So to be really simple about it, we're producing more, therefore the total income, or the pie of income is bigger, and there is a higher GDP per capita, higher income per person. Australia's living standards have grown in the past because we're experiencing economic growth faster than our population growth, and that's largely due to the fact we're becoming more productive, more people are participating in the workforce, so more people are earning an income, and therefore it can be spread more evenly. So rather than just one person in a relationship working, both are working, they've got more money. And technology is allowing us to be more productive as well. This is helping us to keep unemployment down and produce more goods and services. Okay, growth is essential to keeping unemployment down because there's a strong link between these two things. If we're producing more goods and services, generally we need more workers. Okay, that's a direct link. More production of goods and services. If we're producing more, we need more workers, less unemployment. It's not a direct link because we might become more productive and need less workers, but that's the general trend between the two factors. There are problems. While we use GDP per capita as the main measure of our living standards, there are some problems with that, and that includes that it takes no account of the distribution of income. So I might be on 1 million, you might be on 5,000, and our GDP per capita would be 500,000, but you're poor. So it doesn't take any account of the distribution of income, doesn't then take into account how long we're working, so we might be stressed out of our heads, but have really high GDP per capita. We're going to talk about this in Chapter 5, but it doesn't include non-market activity like the cash economy and the black market activity. There's a lot of rich drug dealers out there. It doesn't account remedial work, and I'll discuss that more in Chapter 5. And it doesn't take into account the amount of pollution in our environment and other negative externalities as well. So some negative relationships between material and non-material living standards. Again, we might have really high material living standards but have to work longer hours, which increases stress, reduces leisure, puts pressure on families. High increases in economic growth might affect our long-term economic stability, so it can cause environmental damage. It can mean that we have depletion of our non-renewable resources, so resources that we can't renew, and therefore that can hurt our intertemporal efficiency. Excessive consumption and growth can also lead to this problem of affluenza. And affluenza is like a fancy word for basically people just want to continually get rich. So they're never satisfied because they can't keep up with their neighbours, or they just want this endless pursuit of material things. And it can also lead to increased congestion on the roads. More people have jobs, more people have to get to work. So it can lead to increased congestion. There are some positive relationships though. So for example, increased GDP provides the government with more tax. This means that they have more money to spend on defence, therefore we are safer. And national security, they have more money for health, so we are healthier. They can spend more money on aged care, they can spend more money on education, so we're smarter. So there are some positive links between material and non-material living standards. Higher incomes can also lead to less stress, less family breakdowns, less violence, lower crime rates, less depression, less boredom. Generally, unemployed people have the highest incidence of depression because I suppose there's less reward for getting up in the morning. So they are some positive relationships between material and non-material living standards. Whenever you hear the term long-term economic prosperity, you will hear this term in the future. It's basically just meaning sustainable development, which basically means that we're meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. If you ever get a question on long-term economic prosperity, very similar to intertemporal efficiency, talking about improving living standards for the future. So you might talk about the environment, you might talk about the government and the economy not getting into too much debt, because that's going to mean that we have to pay that back in the future, which will hurt our future living standards, or we won't have the access to loans, which can affect our productive capacity because we can't invest. So just whenever you hear that term long-term economic prosperity, you're talking about development and meeting the needs of the present without compromising the future. Here are some costs and benefits of growth. I'll go through this a little bit more in class, so I won't go into that in too much detail now, but you can have a quick look at it if you want to pause the video. Just some main factors impacting our overall living standards. So income per capita, the biggest measure of material living standards, which is measured by growth in real GDP. Environmental quality, and the distribution of income also comes into it as well. So a lot of people will say there's a trade-off between improving productivity and efficiency, getting people to work harder, and promoting equality. So if we lower taxes, for example, that's going to encourage people to work harder because they get to keep more of their money. But on the flip side, that might hurt equity because there's less money available for welfare. So whenever we're measuring our overall living standards, we don't just look at GDP per capita, we look at the environmental quality of society or Australia, and we also look at the distribution of income. How evenly distributed is that income? And just to finish off, there is a theory that's called the trickle-down theory, which basically says that rich people often advocate this, you'll probably hear Donald Trump advocating this theory, is that we don't want to be too equitable because then eventually we'll just end up producing less. So if we focus too much on equity, people won't want to work, there'll be less incentive for people to work hard and take risks, and therefore our productivity will be diminished, we won't innovate and think of new technologies to make us better off in the future, and therefore what can actually happen is by reducing taxes and promoting growth instead of equity, that can help to boost our growth and boost our living standards, and therefore that will create jobs for low-income earners and middle-income earners. So a lot of rich people advocate the idea that if we focus on boosting growth, we lower the tax burden on company tax and income tax, people will work harder, that will create more production, and that will create jobs for middle-income and low-income earners. But there is controversial whether it will actually help in terms of the distribution of income, even though it might boost our growth. That's all for chapter